Thank you very much. There's a spiritual solution to every problem. It makes a very large claim, the title of this program. When I say a spiritual solution to every problem, I'd like everybody in the audience to just do me a favor, if you will. I'd like you to just point to yourself. Everybody, just for 1 second, just point to yourself. And just look around and just notice how people are. And notice that nobody's doing this. Not one person in the room is doing this. Why is that? Because who we are is not here. Who we are is what? Here. And where have you all pointed to? You pointed to your heart. Shakespeare again put it this way. He said, "Go to thy bosom, knock there, and ask your heart what it doth know." What it doth know. Listening to your heart is what, to me, represents the approach to a spiritual solution to every problem. There's 3 words in that title, in the title of this program: spiritual, solution, and problem. I'd like to just take a brief look at each one of them and what they mean to me. I'd like to take the word problem first. You know, I've been studying something for several years, and the thing that I've been studying is called A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles is a very interesting collection of brilliant writing that I think if the world were living by it, perhaps we would have far, far fewer of the conflicts and struggles and so on that we have amongst ourselves and amongst nations and in our families and so on. And one of the lines that I came across in studying A Course in Miracles hit me very, very strongly. And this line, I couldn't get it out of my head. And here's what it said in there. It said, "You do not have any problems. You only think you do." You do not have any problems. You only think you do. Our problems are things that we carry around inside of us. And if we could recognize that these things that we call problems, no matter what they are, and I'm not here standing up here talking to you on television telling you that, the financial concerns that you face every day, the struggles that you face in your relationships, the whether or not you're going to be able to handle the health concerns and challenges that are facing you, all of these things that have come into our lives that we have labeled problems. But I'd like you to just remind yourself of where they are. They're not out there. They're in here. And they all represent something that I call energy. And one of my very favorite people in all the world, because he was not only a great scientist and a great thinker, but he was a great humanitarian as well. He would have really done well here in Concord. His name was Albert Einstein. And Einstein once said, "Nothing happens until something moves." Nothing happens until something moves. Everything is movement. Things look solid to us. You know, this watch on my arm looks solid. But if I were to take a microscope and turn up the magnification and look at this thing under a very, very strong microscope, you would see that it's really a dance. It's alive. It has molecules. Inside those molecules, there are all kinds of tiny little atoms. Inside those atoms are electrons and neutrons and protons and croutons and whatever it is, all of these things that we memorized when we were in physical science classes and so on. And then we have a new thing called quantum physics, and we look inside of these electrons and we find subatomic particles and subatomic particles. And what we've discovered through all of this is that everything is just energy. And you're watching a television set right now. And that television set has something coming into your home called energy. And you are looking at it, so there's visual energy, and you're hearing sound, you're hearing my voice right now, so there's something in the air between your receiver and my speaking here right now, something called sound waves, and they're all just energy. And if we were to understand how that energy comes into us, it comes into us through our senses, through our ears and through our eyes. And if we were to block off our ears and take all of the energy that was coming in the room into our ears, but before it hit our ears, we were to send it off to a scientist and say, give me a report, please, on this energy. They would send out the report, and they'd come back, and you'd look at it, and you'd say, well, what's in there? What is this? And they'd say, well, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of energy. Some of it's very fast. Some of it's very low. Some of it's high. Some of it's low. I'd say, but are there any problems in this report? They'd say, no, there's no problems in the energy. It just comes in high and it comes in low. It comes in fast and it comes in slow. And you know, that's one of the most important principles that you can learn and master in terms of identifying things that we call problems. That energy only becomes something that we convert into problems when we put it into our head and begin to process it in a certain way. And as we process it in certain ways, we tell ourselves, these things are going to get worse, or this is a terrible experience that I'm going through, or my finances are, or I've just had this terrible bout with a disease, or whatever it might be. And all of it is something that we carry around with us. What I'd like you to do sometime is open up the Torah, or the Old Testament, and look at the opening line of the Old Testament, of the Torah. And the opening line of the Torah, these ancient spiritual texts that we all rely upon and live by. And it says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Most of us have gotten through at least Genesis 1:1, all right? And we understand that. Now you move ahead 31 lines later, and it says, and all that God created was good. Now we're presented with an enormous conundrum, a difficulty in our minds. Everything was created by God, and everything that God created was good. Therefore, how do we ever explain bad? How do we explain evil? How do we explain problems? How do we explain so many of these things that are so much a part of our lives, of our consciousness? You have to see that these are all things that came about when we invented something called the ego. And this ego is nothing more than an idea that we carry around. And this idea that we carry around says that who I am is separate from this source, this perfection into which I was created. That I am separate from it. And as a result of being separate from it, I am what I have, I am what I do, I am what everybody else out there thinks of me, I am my reputation, I am separate from everybody else, and I am separate from God. The other line that came to me in A Course in Miracles, where it uses the word problem, said this: if you do have a problem, the only problem you have is your belief that you are separate from your source. The moment that we took on this idea that we were separate from our source and no longer believed in our own integrity of our own mind, the moment that we took on that, we began to develop something called problems, something called illusions. And I'd like to suggest to you that every problem that we have, the way I see it, is nothing more than a mistake or an illusion. And how do we do something about these mistakes that we have? They are in our minds. You know, it says very clearly in most of the spiritual literature, as a man thinketh, so is he. Emerson, one of the people that we revere, who lived right here in Concord, said that the ancestor to every action is a thought. Once you start to understand that what you think about, your thoughts, is what expands and becomes your life, you start getting real careful about what you think about. Real careful. So that when you have a thought that says, gee, I got a sniffle, it's in my nose, but tomorrow it'll probably be down here in my throat. And on Wednesday, it's probably going to be here in my chest. Always seems to happen this way. And on Thursday, I'm going to have a fever. I get one every time. You can just about count on it. I'm going to have to take Friday off. Now, it's Monday morning, and you got a sniffle, but in your mind, in your thoughts, you're taking Friday off with a fever, and lo and behold, your body begins to react to this thought, which is just a mistake of the intellect to begin with. Supposing that you had a belief system that said 2 plus 2 is 7. For some reason, you were just hung up on this idea. And you said 2 plus 2 is 7. And you took your calculator and you reformulated it in such a way so that it would appear to be 2 plus 2 is 7. And then you tried to balance your checkbook and you tried to make your life work based upon this formulation, that 2 plus 2 is 7. You would find that your life would be out of balance financially virtually all of the time. Every time you push that button and push those numbers, nothing would ever work. So the question is, what do I do in order to correct this mistake in my thinking? And that's where the word solution comes in. But we can't bring the solution in until we understand that everything that we have, do you know that every relationship that you're in right now, every single person watching this, every relationship you're in is in your mind. You can't get behind the eyeballs of another human being and be them. All you can do is process them through your thoughts. Now, if your thoughts about the person that you love are about what is wrong, about what you don't like, about what they ought to be, about what they used to be, about how they disappoint you, about how bad they talk, about their language, about anything at all, if that's what you're thinking about, what you think about is what expands, more of what you're thinking about will continue to show up in your life, whether you like it or not. It's one of the great ironies. I always tell people that if you understood this concept, the best way to do it is to put it in terms of money. If I had $1 million, and I were to take this $1 million and I were to give it to you, and I'd say, this purpose of this $1 million is for you to go out to the mall, and every store you come to where you see something that you really like, you're to purchase it. Any place you go, whatever you like, you purchase it. So you take this $1 million and say, this is great. You walk into the first store that you see, and there's a rug there that's just appalling. It's hideous. It's just awful. It doesn't match anything in your house, and it costs $10,000. And you look at that thing and you say, ugh, I would never want that. Here's $10,000. Send it home. Now you go to the next store in the mall, and it's got a lamp in it that matches the rug, all right? And you look at this hideous lamp, and you say, that's the worst-looking thing I've ever seen. Send 2 of those home, and they cost $5,000 apiece. So far, you've taken your money, and you've spent $20,000 of it on what you don't want. And all day long, every time you saw something that you didn't want, you spent your energy, your money, on sending it home. Then you get home and you say to yourself, why is my house filled with all of this stuff that I don't want? And the answer is, you're crazy. This is called insanity. You have energy to spend it on what you do want, yet you continue to use it to purchase what you don't want. And the metaphor here is that your thoughts work exactly the same way. The energy that you have for creating what you want is in your thoughts. And if you want your relationship to be divine and to be perfect and to be beautiful, then you have to begin to think the kinds of thoughts that are going to create that for you. If, on the other hand, you put your thoughts on what the person isn't, what they ought to be, what they used to be, what you think is wrong, you'll see more of that showing up. And it works in everything in your life. Changing your mind, changing your thoughts is how we change the problems, if you will, that we face in our life. Okay? Now, the word spiritual, there's a spiritual solution to every problem. I am not speaking here about anything that has to do with organized religion or anybody else's religion. I respect everybody's right to worship and be a part of any organization that they choose. And I'm not here to recruit anybody. I don't belong to any organizations. I'm not here trying to convince you to be something other than just a happier, more fulfilled person who can understand that there is a means to bringing a spiritual solution to things in your life that you don't like. These illusions, these mistakes that you have made. Because remember, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and all that was created was good. So that anything that isn't good has come about because of your belief in your mind that you are separate from this divinity. You are not what you have. You are not what you do. You are not what others think of you. You are the beloved. You are the divine. You are a creation that is made into perfection. When I use the word spiritual, I'm speaking now about a way of being. I'm speaking about not being a Buddhist, but being Buddha-like. I'm speaking about not being a Christian, but being Christ-like. I'm speaking about not being a Muslim, but being Muhammad-like. I'm speaking about a way of living which includes specifics, unconditional love, the ability to be able to send love in response to hate, in response to anger, in response to fear, the ability to live that. I'm speaking about the understanding that who I am is not a human being here having a spiritual experience, but it's the reverse. That who I am is really a spiritual being having a human experience. And so there's an infinite part of me. There's a part of me that was never born. There's a part of me that never dies. I've often said that one of the keys to higher awareness is having the ability to step outside of who you are and just become the observer to your life. And when you do that, you tune into the infinite. Carl Jung, one of the greatest teachers, I think, that ever walked on this planet, once said that the telling question of a person's life is their relationship to the infinite. Once you have that relationship to the infinite, I remember I wrote a book a few years ago. It's called Your Sacred Self. And in this book, I talked about the distinction between the ego, this part of us that wants to prove that we're right, and the part of us that wants to be at peace. And a woman came up to me at a talk, and she was one of these people who was going to give me some feedback about my book. And she said, I read your book, and I didn't get anything out of it. I said, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. She said, the only thing I can tell you that I got out of it is that now, after reading it, I no longer have a fear of dying. I said, that's all you got out of one book? This thing that all of us are always in just dread of, and you read that? She said, yeah. She said, it just seemed like I understood that I'm an infinite soul after reading that. I said, well, perhaps that was the message that you had to learn, you know. So to me, spiritual means also it means becoming quiet. It means being able to make conscious contact with your source. To no longer have a sense of everything has to be loud. I have to be constantly talking. For me, meditation is such an important part of my life. I tell people who say they don't have time to meditate, I say, you're in a car, aren't you? You drive back and forth to work? I say, well, yes, I do that. 30 minutes each way. I say, well, how often each day do you think you spend at a red light? The person will say, well, I stop at least 6 or 7 times. I say, that's maybe 1 or 2 minutes each time. They say, yes. I'll say, what I do at red lights is I just stop because my car has come to a stop and my body is in the car, so therefore it has come to a stop. The only thing that's usually still going is my mind. All right? So I say to people, take that minute or two to close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and make conscious contact with your source. Reconnect to your source. There's always somebody behind you to let you know when your minute is up. It never fails, all right? Most of us don't understand that this business of making conscious contact can be illustrated, and if you get it, understand it. See, I think of my source as the ocean, and I think of myself as a glass. And if I were to take this glass and I were to dip it into this ocean of abundance and say, what do I have here? What I have here is a glass of my source. Now, it's not as big, and it's not as strong, but it is still a glass of my source, to which I am always connected. And if I were to take one drop of this source, and I were to put it over here, and I were to say to this drop of water, I would like you to create and sustain life. I would like you to perform miracles. I would like you to end all of my problems. And you watch that drop of water, separate from its source, you would see that it's going to change form from liquid into gas. And eventually it'll return to its source. There's no place else that it can go. There's only one source. But while this drop of water is separate from its source, it loses all of the power of its source. And this drop of water, separate from its source, is a symbol or a metaphor for your ego, the part of you that believes that you have separated from this divinity into which you were created. And as long as you're here, believing that you're separate from it, you will not understand the powers that you get when you figure out a way to reconnect to your source. And becoming quiet and becoming someone who is making conscious contact with your source is what I'm asking you to look at. Because once you leave this ego behind, once you leave behind this idea that I'm separate from it and reconnect to it, then all of the powers of the source, of the ocean, the powers to create and sustain life, the powers to heal, the powers to attract abundance into my life, the powers to make my relationships divine and beautiful, the powers to appreciate, the powers to be miraculous. As one of my teachers, Abraham Maslow, once said, that self-actualizing people, these people who live at the highest levels, are people who must be what they can be. They must be what they're potentially capable of being. And this is what I mean by being in the world of spirit. One of my favorite Persian poets, Rumi, who lived back in the 13th century, once said, "Sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment." Be in a state of bewilderment. That's what I mean by being spiritual. One of the ways to test whether you're on the path that I'm speaking about, the path of being into a spiritual being, having a human experience rather than the other way around, is to detect in yourself how much of my energy and my time do I spend being in a state of cheerfulness. How cheerful am I? Or how morose am I? How down am I? How, when I'm coming home to my family and to those that I love, how am I anticipating what it's going to be like when I go into the house? Am I down more? Am I unhappy more? Am I looking at the pessimistic side of life? Am I always feeling that something might be wrong? Am I putting my attention on what I don't want? Because if your thoughts are on what you don't want, and what you think about is what expands, what you don't want is what you'll continue to see showing up in your life. You'll keep purchasing it. Another element of what we call spiritual in these three words in this program is the sense or the extent to which you feel connected to other people. You see, the ego is the part of us that believes that we're separate from each other. I'm separate from you, you're separate from me. You have a different body than I do. I'm separate from what I would like to attract into my life, and I am separate from God. When you move into a spiritual approach to life, you begin to see yourself as connected to everyone and everything. And competition is replaced by something called cooperation. And when you see another human being in pain or struggling, you know that a part of you is in pain and struggling. And you begin to reach out rather than looking within and saying, how does this affect just me? I refer to, when I use this word, spiritual, a sense of an awareness that it isn't about being better than somebody else. I think true nobility is not about being better than anyone else. It's about being better than you used to be. All right? And spiritual, it means cheerfulness, it means kindness, it means peace, it means love, it means forgiveness. It means living these principles, feeling connected and knowing that you're infinite. And finally, the word solution. And what is the solution? The solution is the most exciting part of the program. The solution for me represents the ability to bring to your life something that can make these things called problems disappear, dissolve, and nullify. And that is what I spoke about when I opened up here a little while ago about energy. Energy comes in the form of fast and slow, high and low. And higher and faster energy nullifies lower and slower energy. A room full of darkness. Darkness is a lower and a slower energy, if you measure it, than is light. And when you bring light to the presence of a dark room, the darkness disappears. And that is a metaphor for every single one of the problems and concerns and struggles that you are facing in your life. And way back, 800 years ago, there lived a little man who gave up all of his possessions. He lived in a little village in Italy, near Florence, called Assisi. And we named one of our most famous cities in America after him. His name was Francesco, or as he became known later after his passing, St. Francis of Assisi. And I went to Assisi, and I had miracles that took place for me in visiting Assisi on several occasions. And St. Francis was one of these people who created a prayer that is perhaps the most well-known prayer on the planet today, certainly one of them. And when I wrote A Spiritual Solution to Every Problem, I took the first 7 lines of this famous prayer and I made them into a chapter of the book. And I'd like to share those with you here in this program right now, those 7 lines, because they represent an 800-year-old technology, if you will, for bringing a spiritual solution to anything in your life that constitutes a problem. The first line in this famous prayer says, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." How can I become an instrument of thy peace? The ego is the part of us that wants to be at war, that wants to defeat, that wants to collect, that wants to be better than, that wants to always get more. The sacred or the highest part of ourselves is the part of us that just wants to be at peace. How can I become an instrument of peace? Not someone who's looking for peace, but someone who delivers it. There are opportunities every day. I was in a gas station just a few days ago, and in this gas station they had a car wash. And there was a young boy, he was maybe 18 or 19 years old, and he didn't speak English very well, and he couldn't figure out how to work the car wash. And he had put $2 in, and apparently it required $3. And he was in there waiting to pay for his car wash and trying to get an answer to why he couldn't get it to work. And I had just gotten some gasoline, and I walked in, and there was this man behind the counter berating this young boy and humiliating him and talking to him. And because he didn't understand the language, he talked louder to him. You know how people do that? You know, if someone doesn't understand you, you say, "What I said is," and they say, "I don't understand," and then you say it even louder. Well, that's what he was doing to this young boy. And I saw this is an opportunity right here in this instant to be an instrument of peace. And I put my arm around the young man and I said, "Come with me." And I walked out to the machine and I took $1 and I put it into and he walked away and he was just so happy. One tiny little incident. These kinds of things, I suggest to you that you take this day and look for 5 occasions to be an instrument of peace. And you'll find one when you're on your way home on the freeway. You'll find somebody who isn't going to let you get in. You find somebody who doesn't want to let you pass. And instead of giving them a hard time or being angry at them, try sending something called peace their way. There's a wonderful line that I have on the dashboard of my car. It says, "I can choose peace rather than this." And it's always a reminder that no matter what I'm experiencing in my life, I want to be an instrument of peace. The second line in this very famous prayer says, "Where there is hatred, let me sow love." It's been said that the 3 most difficult things to do in the world are this. The first is to send love in response to hatred. The second is to defend the absent. That is, whoever's being gossiped about, you become their spokesperson. I do this with my children all the time when they're all saying this, and then she said that, and he said that. I'll say, "Excuse me, but who is defending the absent person here?" "Well, why should anybody defend her?" I'll say, "Well, I'll just take her position right now, if you don't mind." And the third is to admit when you were wrong. And it doesn't mean necessarily to say, "I just made a mistake." It means to say, "I have been making the wrong kinds of choices in my life with my mind. I've been putting my attention on what I don't want. on what others want for me, on what the world ought to be, on what it used to be, and I can't understand why it just keeps showing up, what I don't want, what others want for me, what I despise. I have to admit, almost I have to rewrite my agreement with reality. And there's a woman that I have a great deal of admiration for who passed away a short time ago. Her name was Mother Teresa, a woman whom people all over the world revered, no matter what their religious persuasion. And this is one of the things that Mother Teresa said. When people say to me, how do I do this? How can I make this work? I say, this is a way. And I put this in the book, and I wanted to include it in this program. It's called The Final Analysis. And this is what she said. And there's so much beauty in this, and so much of what St. Francis was speaking about back in the 13th century, because he was a man who was ridiculed wherever he went. And he was just out there trying to teach people to bring the solution, spiritual solution to your problems. If hatred is existing in your world, that's an energy field. It's a lower and a slow energy than the energy of love. If you can bring love to the presence of that hatred, it will be nullified just as if you were bringing light to darkness. But for most of us, what we do when we see hatred is we respond in kind to that hatred. There's a wonderful book that I have a great affection for. It's called Power versus Force. It's written by a psychiatrist. His name is David Hawkins, and he's a PhD as well. And he talks about how mankind has not evolved, because every time we have a dispute, what we do in that dispute is, when someone has hatred or anger or any of these slower and lower energies, is that we respond with the same energy of hatred and anger. And what we do is we create a counterforce, and that counterforce weakens everyone in its energy field. They said of Jesus, they said of Buddha, they said of these great spiritual masters, and Mother Teresa was one, that when they would walk into a village, just their presence in the village and nothing more would raise the consciousness of those around them. Just by being in the presence of someone who radiates out this kind of love, you alter it and change it. And here's what Mother Teresa said. She said, people are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, she said, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone may destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may just never be enough. Give the world the best you have anyway. You see, she said, in the final analysis, it's all between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Isn't that beautiful? It's Mother Teresa, and you should applaud because she deserves that. Thank you. You begin to see that this is an 800-year-old technology. This prayer isn't the most famous prayer in the world, or one of them, because it just happens to be catchy. This prayer of St. Francis is revered by people of all persuasions all over the world because it represents a spiritual solution to any problem you could ever face. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. How can I bring pardon to the presence of injury? And what is pardon but forgiveness? And what is forgiveness but the ability to love someone in response to something that they may have done to you that you feel hurt by at some time in your life? There's a Chinese proverb that says, if you're going to pursue revenge, you'd better dig 2 graves. Because one of those graves will be for yourself.